This one is just allowing people to see that cannabis is not to be feared and to have other components of it that could be beneficial when used in a more mindful nature. And so that's really where we try to exist, is just there's going to be all different types of people, all different types of backgrounds, all different bodies, all different preferences. And our job is to make them think a little bit more open-minded to what tools exist. Yes, we are cannabis advocates, so we do advocate for cannabis to be a tool, but again, it's not the end-all be-all tool. I just want people to have a more mindful understanding of what products, what tools to grab when they need help. And yes, I do believe cannabis can be a really helpful tool in your toolkit if you know how to use it.
All right. Hello. Welcome back to the Evergreen RX. I'm your host, Hayden. I'm a licensed mental health therapist, Cancer Moon, first to get deep at any party. And today I am so excited because we are joined by Shayda Torabi. Shayda is the co-founder and CEO of Restart, Texas's premier cannabis brand. She's also the president of the Texas Hemp Coalition, which does advocacy efforts for cannabis in Texas. She's passionate about helping build great consumer brands, using her background in marketing and technology to help navigate the cannabis industry. And bring high quality cannabis products and education to consumers. She's a public speaker and content creator. She's a great follow online because she shares all her thoughts on the growing cannabis industry, and she can be found at the Shayda Torabi. She's also a welcome guest in the Evergreen RX community because she's also a native Austinite. So in my experience, that's always a green flag for people that I like to spend my time around. So I'm just so excited to talk to her today.
Thank you so much, Hayden, for having me. I'm excited to dive in and also connect with a fellow Austinite as well.
Yeah. So I'm just hoping that listeners walk away from today's episode with some basic cannabis literacy, kind of knowing some different types. Most people have heard of THC, CBD, but what about CBC, CBG, things like that? Talk about some like boundaries and intentions when using cannabis as a potential tool in the your wellness routine, and just touching a little bit on your experience in entrepreneurship, and just kind of working in a field that's so fraught with misinformation and with stigma, and kind of how you navigate around that. So I think we got some good stuff to talk about.
Heck yeah, let's dive right in.
Okay, yeah. So I just kind of want to start off with a general cannabis education kind of primer. So what's the difference between all of those acronyms that I just listed, and kind of maybe go over some pros and cons between all the different variations of cannabis?
Yeah, of course. So I guess to kind of back up a little bit before we get into, those acronyms are referred to as cannabinoids. Some people also say cannabinoids. There's a lot of different pronunciations of the term, but essentially cannabinoids are those compounds that are related to the effects of the cannabis plant, specifically CBD, THC, like you mentioned, but those cannabinoids are found in both the hemp and the marijuana plant. I like to highlight those two, sides of the coin, so to speak, because they really, kind of point up towards cannabis. Cannabis to me is the overarching term, and cannabis maybe, pre 2018 meant something different than cannabis now. Post 2018, specifically in 2018, the Farm Bill is a piece of legislation that legalized hemp at a federal level. And kind of going back to those two sides of the coin, hemp versus marijuana, hemp is legally and federally defined, as well as defined here in the state of Texas as anything that is less than 0.3% Delta 9 THC on a dry weight basis. It is a very specific, some would say loose, some would want more clarity around, but we can obviously dive into that more as we talk through the conversation, but not to overwhelm you or the listeners. Really, I just want them to understand cannabis is cannabis, and cannabinoids exist in the cannabis plant, whether it is hemp or marijuana. So that means that CBD as a cannabinoid is going to be in hemp as well as present in marijuana. And again, the discerning line is hemp is classified as anything specifically that contains less than 0.3% delta 9 THC, and anything over that delta 9 THC threshold is considered marijuana. So what does that mean? Well, it means that there are cannabinoids that exist in both sides of the plant, but really the one that is the most, I would say, contentious is this delta 9 THC. Why is it so contentious? Well, because delta 9 THC is one of the more abundant cannabinoids. I would say delta 9 and CBD are more readily available cannabinoids. The
Mm.
other cannabinoids that are present might be in smaller percentages that, yes, they're present in the cannabis plant, but depending on the strain, depending on the genetics, how that plant is grown, again, super step back, everybody. It's a plant first and foremost. And so there's going to be a lot of variability to that plant. Just think of,
Mm.
your everyday crops of like apples or oranges. Like there are variations based on the genetics, the seed. Is it a clementine orange or is it a sumo orange? Was that orange grown indoor or outdoor? Who was the
Mm.
actual grower or cultivator? What nutrients did they provide to that plant? And so those inputs are what allows the plant to produce maybe a higher THC percentage or a higher CBD percentage, which gets into different strains. But that's kind of a long-winded roundabout way to say the cannabis plant is a very complex plant, but these cannabinoids exist in the plant no matter what the strain or what side of the coin, hemp or marijuana, those might come from. But the reason that these cannabinoids have become super popular, specifically in places like Texas, is
Mm.
because of hemp's legalization in 2018, kind of kicking the lid off of the conversation around cannabis. Because remember, kind of prior to that and still presently, marijuana is a scheduled drug. So you can't do a lot of research with marijuana. Marijuana is not legal in Texas. So it's a little confusing to kind of the familiar person who might be listening to this, but hopefully it can start to be just a little bit of a scratch the surface of further education, whether that's in our conversation or just jumping off points to other resources, whether it's things that we produce at Restart. We're really big on YouTube, really big with education, really big on social media,
Mhm.
or just encouraging people to go have those conversations with Google or ChatGPT or
Yeah.
Siri or their friends, just to be able to understand what these different cannabinoids mean. But some are psychoactive, some are non-psychoactive, and they
Uh-huh.
have different properties to them, and how your body interacts with them is all thanks to an endocannabinoid system. So whether you consume cannabis or not, your body has an endocannabinoid system. And the most rudimentary way of thinking about it is a cannabinoid is essentially like a square block, and your endocannabinoid system has a square hole. And when you consume cannabis, those cannabinoids, they bind to your receptors, and that is how you feel effects. So I will leave it at
Mm.
that, because there's a lot of things to get into between, your endocannabinoid system has a CB1 receptor, there's a CB2 receptor. The cannabinoids bind to different receptors. They have different interactions, which is why you might feel a myriad of effects based on what cannabinoid you're consuming, how you're consuming it, edible versus smokable, what the percentages of those cannabinoids. So again, I guess like the whole point I'm trying to resonate with you and with the listeners is cannabis is not just transactional. I'm going to take this THC gummy and I'm going to feel a certain way. It's like, yes, you can, but there's so many other identifying clues that can actually help make that interaction with cannabis maybe more fine-tuned. So getting into how many milligrams of THC, again, form
Mm.
factor, the sourcing, other cannabinoids you take together. So you could take THC by itself, but I love taking THC with CBD, or maybe even CBN, which is a more cannabinol. So CBD stands for cannabidiol, CBN is cannabinol, THC is tetrahydrocannabinol. So these are all chemical compounds that we, distill down into CBD, THC, things like that. But it all functions because your body has an endocannabinoid system, and these are cannabinoids.
Okay, so interesting. I feel like you like have it down, laying all of that out and knowing all of that terminology, which is really impressive. Seems like a lot to keep track of. And I'm kind of curious with the endocannabinoid system inside of all of us, is it does it look the same inside of every person, or is that like another step on top of it, like depending on what you're consuming and then how your body in particular maybe fits in those kind of puzzle pieces, if that makes sense? Is that kind of,
It
is it
does make
variable or
sense.
is it?
Yeah, I would say that everything is variable. You know, some people's bodies respond more so towards a particular cannabinoid or combination of cannabinoids. Certainly, there are preferences that we as human beings maybe have dispositions towards. You know, I grew up consuming cannabis by way of smoking and inhaling. And so to me, that is more comfortable. I enjoy smoking my cannabis because I will feel it faster than when I ingest an edible. But we have customers and people we talk to all the time who come into the dispensary, they come into Restart and they're like, I've never smoked. I don't want to smoke. Can I still get the benefits of cannabis? It's like, yes, absolutely. So while form
Mm,
factor might have an impact in actually how it's being absorbed in your body, I wouldn't say that it is explicit to where you would or wouldn't have the benefits or effects of it. But absolutely, it could play a role into how much you're consuming, how much your body is absorbing. And then everybody's biochemistry is different. So I would say, I don't personally know, too much about the specifics of the endocannabinoid system as it relates to, let's say you, Hayden, versus me. I
mhm.
would imagine, yes, there are variabilities just because, your body might be able to process fat better than my body. Your body might have a faster metabolism. So I think those are things that are more, things I would be mindful of in regards
Yeah.
to how cannabis is interacting with our bodies. And also, the best rule of thumb is to, one, trial and error. I know as scary as that can be for people, especially when dealing with something like cannabis that has a huge stigma around it. But really, I
Mm,
think that's the best way to explore and to see what your body's responding to. So we often have conversations with our community and customers of, you know, let's say you don't want to smoke, but you want to eat an edible. Okay, well, that's fine. Don't have to worry about smoking. But when it comes to edibles, maybe you should try 5 milligrams of THC versus 10 milligrams of THC. Let's get a baseline. Let's kind of compare and contrast what different milligrams are going to do for you in regards to getting you to the desired outcome that you are seeking. So there are some, again, internal things that you have to be mindful of with your own body, but there's
mm,
also things just around a preference as well as just really understanding the plant. I think we struggle as an industry to kind of find our place. We are considered a vice. We're considered a medicine. Are we a supplement? Should we be regulated like some of these other industries, alcohol, tobacco, supplementation? So that kind of aside as being an already challenge for our industry, I think the most comparable thing to express to listeners would be to look at it like a supplementation, just in
mm,
terms of how you want to be consuming it. So, yes, I think there's absolutely the recreational component of it. I want to sleep better. I want to, feel better before I go to this music show. You can absolutely take cannabis and have that transactional outcome. But I think if you are really looking to incorporate, cannabis and these cannabinoids for long-term benefit, which there is a lot of anecdotal evidence and more, I would say, substantiated evidence, thanks to hemp's federal legalization, allowing for more research to be done, you are
yeah.
starting to see just more ways that people are experiencing, exploring, applying, utilizing this plant. And so there are a lot of really cool things that can be applied. My own personal story to interject just a little bit of history for the listeners.
Mhm.
I grew up in Austin, as you mentioned, born and raised here. Texas, for those listening out of the state who don't know, maybe those in Texas, Texas does not have an adult use recreational marijuana program. We have a very rudimentary medical marijuana program. So, all that to say, cannabis is not something that I had access to in a legal sense,
Mhm.
but very much did love live music, as I kind of alluded to, and very much love using cannabis with live music. So that for me was a very big part of my young adult kind of journey. I would go to concerts, I would consume cannabis. It was just very recreational, very kind of fun aspect of it. And to
Yeah.
me, I don't like alcohol. So I like to use cannabis in place of alcohol. I like the way that cannabis makes me feel more in control. Obviously, everybody is different, but in that sense, that was something that I was very mindful of. Using it just kind of more that transactional, I want to feel better, I want to sleep better, I want to insert whatever. And then in 2015, I was in a car accident. I was hit by a vehicle as a pedestrian in downtown Austin, broke my pelvis. And so at that point in my life, that's really when I started to look at cannabis more as a medicine. And that was really the entry point for me and my family, because I own my business with my sisters, would be our conversation of, whoa, cannabis is more than just THC. It's more than just getting high. It's more than just smoking it. Now I became familiar with CBD as a great anti-inflammatory, CBG, another really great cannabinoid that's known to be anti-inflammatory, starting to do both research as well as personal experimentation on myself, because I do have that comfortability with cannabis to understand, okay, well, what does CBD do to me that's different than THC? Okay, well, what if I take CBD with THC? Wow, well, that actually makes me feel even better. And so the accident was really our journey as an individual, for myself as well as my family, to start to unpack some of the stigma and some of the mystery around cannabis. And so I would say that was really our foundation to build our brand, to just be a safe space where people could explore these conversations. For every
Yeah.
customer that comes in that's like, I'm just looking for something to make me feel high. I have just as many people coming in who are saying, hey, I'm having a hard time sleeping. Hey, I'm having so much anxiety. Hey, I've got chronic pain. And being able to walk them through these different cannabinoids, these different form factors, these doses, is really a unique journey that I can share all this information, but you, like the person listening, you, Hayden, have to take these products and you have to discern and figure out what is the right product for me, what's the right amount for me, what does that look like in my day-to-day lifestyle. And so for me, I started to realize that CBD specifically as a non-psychoactive cannabinoid, having really great anti-inflammatory properties, was something that I needed to start taking
Mm,
independently as well as in addition to my THC affinity, because they
mm-hmm.
are different cannabinoids, right? And so using them for different purposes, using them in different ways, was something that I really, valued being able to go on that journey, and something that we try to help our customers understand. It's like, yes, you can take an edible and feel an effect, but if you're looking for the benefit, I believe looking at like a supplement and really working it into your everyday life cycle and your lifestyle is where you'll find the most benefit and reward with these products and with this plant.
I love the way that you're talking about all of this as just like this personal exploration and being able to try different things on, try different form factors out, really get curious with yourself about what's working for you and how it's working for you and what even impact you want. I think that's kind of the intentionality that we'll probably touch on a little more later. But really knowing why you want to engage with these products, and even when you're talking about it, opening up your scope of what benefits you can get out of using cannabis and the different forms and the combinations of things. And I think a lot of times, well, one thing with that is, this holistic health journey that I'm on and that my listeners are on, and kind of the education that I want to bring through this podcast about being able to create your own prescription for living well, being able to figure out what that looks like, which on, my scope means a lot of different things. The meditation practice you might incorporate, what you want your fitness practice to look like, who your friends are, but also, you know, if you want to add in things like cannabis or other, products, supplements, adaptogens, all that, kind of taking this intentionality that you want to bring to your whole life and your whole wellness routine into how you engage with each individual product too. And so I just really resonate with the way that you talk about and have customers that come in and are able to have these discussions with you too, which is so empowering to be like, okay, I'm not even trying to get high. I just want this for pain management, things like that. And that kind of brings me to something I want to talk about, which is, from the mental health side of this, I've heard from a lot of friends and from my own experience about, sometimes the effects of kind of the psychoactive, I guess, separating out side of getting high, which is pretty much the only part I've thought about until kind of starting to watch your content and engage with you. Um, and that sometimes people can have really bad experiences with that. A lot of feelings of like isolation, a lot of anxiety, which it's funny because a lot of times you hear like, oh, like smoke some weed, you'll like relax, you'll feel chill. And it's like for some people, it's like the complete opposite and it can be really anxiety
Totally.
inducing. And I'm kind of curious on like where does that come from? How do you see that impacting people or maybe consumers that you have talked to that have this experience, and like how do you address that?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, a really important topic. Again, obviously, I think looking back from a cannabis industry perspective, cannabis has been stigmatized for so long that we're like, there's no negative repercussions. Everybody kind of is in the woo woo of like, cannabis is great. There can be no negative, side effects to cannabis. And it's just not the reality. And I want to meet people where they're at. So whether they have had a prior experience or just have a personal, preference for consuming or not consuming something, or wanting to, maintain total control over them because they maybe don't want to have something psychoactive interfering with their mind, their life. I understand and I can relate to that in so many ways, just because I have consume cannabis. Presently, my evolution of how I consume and what I consume has evolved over the years. So I mentioned like really enjoying smoking cannabis. Well, to punch what's the right saying? Like to kind of like just like cats out of the bag of like smoking is not healthy, right? So like to use
Mm-hmm.
smoking as this like, well, it's going to help your anxiety go away, but then like you're smoking, you're kind of trading this for that. It still is something that I personally wrestle through of, well, it can be good, but it can also have negative repercussions, right? And so wanting to look at something in maybe the specific scenario or situation and not as something that is like going to remain the same. So what I mean by that is my consumption has shifted. So there have been periods in my life where I've consumed way more THC, whether it was smoking, whether it was edibles, other form factors, just like taking in a higher intake of THC, to now maybe in my life cycle, I'm trying to consume less THC. I'm also trying to consume less smoking cannabis because I'm mindful of those other repercussions. And so I think when you're getting into just the mental space of someone who is looking at cannabis, and I love what you were kind of saying, kind of precursing this next kind of segment, cannabis is a tool. It's not the tool. It shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
anybody's end all be all. It's certainly not mine. I love what you were highlighting around, exercise and your diet and who you hang out with and like meditation. Like to me, cannabis was the trade-off to maybe being on opioids or
Yeah.
getting steroid injections done when I was really in the height of my, pelvis pain. Now I use, again, maybe less of it and maybe less psychoactive, less THC, more CBD, more CBG from an anti-inflammatory perspective. And so it's just what season am I in life and how does my body respond, and not trying to force my body into anything, which is further reinforcing like when we have customers come in and they want to have these conversations. Again, I think the industry has made it be like, well, cannabis is THC and you must consume THC and you must smoke it and it must be this, this, this. And if it's not, then it's not. I just don't think that's right. And as a hemp operator in a state like Texas, it's been really encouraging to be able to go through my own journey of evolving how I consume, what I consume, how much I consume, when I consume, and being able
Mm-hmm.
to, relay that experience to my customers and our community to really meet them where they're at, to where if someone comes in and they are complaining, of a certain thing that they're trying to address with cannabis, being really upfront of like, this isn't the end all be all, maybe it's a combination of cannabis and exercise. Maybe it's a combination of cannabis and like not sleeping with your phone next to your face before bed. And
Yeah.
you're telling me that you have a hard time sleeping. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So there are other things that might be at play, but I think the biggest one is just allowing people to see that cannabis is not to be feared and to have other components of it that could be beneficial when used in a more mindful nature. And so that's really where we try to exist, is just there's going to be all different types of people, all different types of backgrounds, all different bodies, all different preferences. And our job is to make them think a little bit more open-minded to what tools exist. Yes, we are cannabis advocates, so we do advocate for cannabis to be a tool, but again, it's not the end-all be-all tool. I just want people to have a more mindful understanding of what products, what tools to grab when they need help. And yes, I do believe cannabis can be a really helpful tool in your toolkit if you know how to use it. And so that's really the jumping off point for our whole brand and business is, yeah, there's THC, but there's all these other cannabinoids. Like I mentioned, over 130 of them. We probably sell realistically maybe 6 to 8. So
Yeah.
you're not even really, able to fully educate and understand in totality the full complexity of the cannabis plant. And I appreciate your acknowledgement of my education. I have so much more to learn, and I think that's just where we try to exist as a business, where I try to exist as an entrepreneur and as a leader in this space. Is this is what I know, but let's talk about it. Let's learn. So we do meet people all the time who are telling us stories of different things that they've tried, experiences that they've had. Again, one of the trends I see right now is a lot of people, especially as they're aging out, I'll kind of, use my generation as an example, us girlies who are in our 30s, who grew up, smoking pot, smoking dope. We're now aging into, our mid 30s, early 40s, and we're like, I don't feel the best when I consume the way that I did when I was in my, late 20s or mid 20s or early 20s. And so I think that's just, to say it, like, let your body tell you what it needs. Let
Yeah.
your body evolve. So if you're feeling bad for taking something, like, don't do that again.
Yeah, that just resonates so much because honestly, like for me, as a therapist, I have been a little bit skeptical of like talking about cannabis in this really like magical. Oh my god, it's great! Like just like smoke some weed, do whatever. And especially with like younger generations, like sometimes that can be just around like any drug too. It can be talked about in a very cavalier way, and I think that it can be a great tool, and hearing you talk about it's like, okay, yeah, this is a great tool. And I kind of got like chills talking about, you being able to use this after your accident instead of something like an opioid, that's really powerful. And bringing in the layers of every person's unique background, their relationship to drugs in general, or just to any kind of self medication in general, which can look like a ton of different things, but also trauma background and, their particular set of like mental health challenges or what medication they might already be on for different mental health diagnoses, things like that. Adding all of that in has made me, on the mental health practitioner side, skeptical of things like cannabis. Or, if I have a client that comes in and is just like, oh, yeah, I smoke every night, I kind of am figuring out my place within that too, because I want to educate people on the impacts that any substance that we um, engage with and how it can impact our mental health. And I also want to respect and understand what that product is doing for them. Like why are they using it and what are the benefits? And like, okay, are we in the realm of you're educated on this and this is working for you and this is giving you some of the things that you need? Great. Or are we in the realm of, okay, this is still some self medication and things like that? And what I love so much about what you're doing and exactly the way you're talking about it is because it is so intentional. It's bringing so much awareness, so much personal education, um, and not just kind of either sugarcoating it and making it like this magical thing, or bringing this fear language of like, you shouldn't do that and that's bad for you. And like, there's nothing good that can come from using cannabis. And so, really finding that like sweet middle ground, which is something I wanted to talk to you about. And maybe you have more to say here on like the language and the stigma that still exists around cannabis is so strong. And I think something my generation is getting really good at is everything you're talking about with kind of like the girlies that are now in their 30s or nearing their 40s that are like, oh, okay, this isn't like really hitting the same. Like, how do I want to use this? I feel like my generation is getting better at even earlier and earlier being like, wait, how is this impacting my body? Like, what do I want to do about this? Like, even the movement towards not drinking as much and, things like that is, it's great and it's always going to benefit us. But I feel like there still is so much misinformation and stigma and uninformed consumption that either makes people run towards something like cannabis and claim it and not want to shy away like it's this gateway drug, and then other people that want to run away from it and don't see how it could potentially be a tool for them.
I think thanks to, I mean, first off, I should say, as a Texan, I never thought that I'd be operating in this industry, let alone being a public figurehead talking openly about my cannabis consumption, let alone educating other people. So I really truly want to, just put myself out there in the sense of like, yes, I'm so grateful for the platform positions that I've been able to step into. But I do it humbly and really with a stance of like, there's so much more education that has to come. Like, I know some stuff, but like it's not everything, right? And so I think with that understanding and mentality, looking to, unfortunately, with cannabis, perhaps like most other things, and certainly, other industries, there is a component of legalization, legislation, advocacy, policy. Like when you're talking about language specifically, why is something legal or illegal is really like the baseline for cannabis, because that is, as an industry, something that we're trying to overcome. So much of what I deal with on a day to day basis is like, is this legal for me to sell? Is this illegal? Does this violate the law? What are my boundaries? What are the parameters? And not only just like operating as an industry, but then ultimately like passing that information on to a consumer. What do you as a consumer have access to? Again, especially in Texas, it's very confusing. People are like, well, I thought that marijuana, let's use cannabis, is illegal. And I would say, no, marijuana is illegal, but hemp is not. So cannabis is not illegal in Texas. And so those words are making it both helpful and harder in the scheme of having this conversation. And so, again, I try to do so much just personal work to our consumers, to our community, to the organizations that I, reflect in. And a representation of that, we're always dealing with language, and so trying to erode what the stigma has maybe said, as well as kind of shine a new light on it. And I think that part of that is just generational. There are people who just grew up with a certain generation, whether it was the news influencing them, whether it was their peers, whether it was their parents, painting this plant in a certain light. I think
Yeah.
that's really unfortunate, because like, is cannabis for everyone? No. But should cannabis have been demonized and stigmatized, and the words used around it permeating like still to this day? It's like, also no. So is there a better middle ground that we could have, kind of like your approach that you're articulating with your clients? You want to meet someone where they're at. You don't want to reinforce it if it's used in a bad way, right? Which absolutely there can be overconsumption and addiction to anything, right? Bad habits form. I don't want to glorify it and be like, it's better, it's, but for me, I would rather be on cannabis every day than on opioids every day. So it's a little bit
Yep.
like, yes, pick your poison, right? On the other end of it, it's like, you don't want to glorify it again and be like, yeah, everything is gravy, baby. It's like, you'd really just have to kind of understand all these inputs. And so I'm very blessed and grateful that I have had the exposure and the experience and the opportunity to navigate it as an individual, navigate it from an entrepreneurial perspective, navigate it from a political perspective, from an advocacy perspective. And so I find myself in a lot of conversations and a lot of rooms with people all across generations, all across the United States. So from a state to state perspective to just a consumer perspective, with the variability between preferences. Again, what people like, what people don't like, what they experienced growing up, and things like that. And so it does really come down to the language we use. And I believe that the language is evolving, and we're seeing the conversation evolve. And that's really exciting and really empowering because of conversations like this. Like, we get to
Mhm.
sit on a podcast. And I appreciate you for making space for this, because I really do believe it's not, it's always fun to be like, oh, I spoke to, 100,000 people, or like my video went viral and it was like seen by a million people. But like, this is more where I find the value. It's like the one-to-one conversations. It's like, if I can empower Hayden, then Hayden's going to be more knowledgeable when she goes out into the world and talks to her clients, her peers, her family, her friends. And so when we interact with our customers, we treat it almost in that consultative approach as well, of like, hey, Bill, or hey, Susan, or hey, Jeremy, or hey, Andrea, like, you're a singular person, and how you view this plant has a whole lot of, pros and cons to it. How do I meet you where you're at? And how do I give you just enough information and education? Again, I'm not the keeper of the information. I'm not the keeper of the truth. It's out there. And so that's going to be incumbent upon the recipient, the consumer, the person, to take this information, to take the interactions, to take the products, to read the labels, to understand their bodies, what their bodies like and don't like, and then make a plan from there. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of nuance and understanding and empathy and conversation that you want to bring to this, it feels really good. It feels so good talking to you. I can imagine how your customers feel talking to you about this, or anybody that you educate about it. And I wanted to touch on your entrepreneurship because I just think what you do is so cool, and even the political aspects and advocacy. I mean, there's a lot of layers to what you do, and figuring out if your product is legal, if it's something you can sell, like all of that. It's just really impressive. And I've struggled between wanting to touch on the fact that you are a female entrepreneur, because I know a lot of my audience is women, and I really value talking to women that are doing things in all these different spaces. And then there's that other side that's like, oh God, why do we just have to highlight female entrepreneur instead of just entrepreneur? Like, but I think it is a part of the conversation. And I think it's becoming more apparent to me too, the way that you run your business, being informed by your own life experience. And I think by being a woman, because even how you're talking about it, letting all this nuance, all this gray area, like really allowing people to talk about their own experience, bringing in the context into how they want to use it, and having that flexibility. Like, I think that is informed by being a female in this space. And I mean, yeah, you can tell me if you feel differently or if you've seen something different, but I imagine that there's probably not a ton of women in the cannabis space either, like really doing what you're doing at this high level. And I'm just kind of curious to know a little bit more what that experience has been like for you, and how you've dealt with and navigated as you've been building your business.
Yeah, well, first, I appreciate the kind of, pause and discernment around, should we be talking about female entrepreneurs versus just entrepreneurs in general? I kind of take a similar stance to you of like, don't call out that I'm a female. Like, I'm a business owner. I'm an entrepreneur. Like, this is what I
Yeah.
do. Um, but I do think that there is something to say for, just who we innately are as females, and, the challenges that we do face just historically when it comes to speaking up, having a voice, being successful. I know, just like as an aside, in general, being a female entrepreneur, dating, I'm now married. I love my husband. He's a very strong man to be married to me, right? Because I'm a strong female. And so I think, like, in that capacity, like, absolutely being a female is completely different. So we should talk about the differences, because we do have just a different disposition to that conversation. And I know that not everybody can handle, a strong, empowered woman sometimes. And absolutely in cannabis, there's not as many of us, but I always like to highlight, the plant is female. So it is a female
Mm.
plant that we, derive all of our properties, cannabinoids, wellness, things that, the plant provides to us that we benefit from. It is a female plant. So I think there's some beautiful correlation to the work that I get to do as a female in this industry, is really on behalf and on the, extra advocacy of the plant being female. But yeah, it's just like a tale as old as time, right? People always want to underestimate people, specifically women. And so as a female in the space, I do feel underestimated a lot. But I think for me, maybe that's like when you do like your strengths finders, like my strengths finders for sure is like competition is up there. And I talk to my husband about this all the time. I'm like, it's not that I'm in competition with other people as much as I'm always in competition with myself. And
Yeah.
so if someone underestimates me, I'm like, oh, you just, you don't even, it's not even like you don't have what's coming next. It's like, you don't have what's coming next because you've just like lit a fire inside of me that is me versus me. And so being able to, kind of bring that to the table in this industry is really fun. Again, I love going to conferences, and when I go to these conferences traditionally, even if I'm a speaker, even if I'm like representing my brand, which does have, some acclaim to it, people are always like, what do you do in here, little lady? Not that they're saying that explicitly to me, but that's kind of the, sentiment I feel when I walk up to a booth full of guys. They're kind of like, oh, where's your boss, or where's, the man, where's the guy who's kind of,
Yeah.
guiding you through this? And they're always, I think, shocked to be met with the kinds of questions that I ask. And I think that's just an extension of, I have a lot of accountability that I hold for this industry, and therefore the people that I do business with in this industry, I want to also hold accountable. Yeah, the industry is challenging for all entrepreneurs. It is especially challenging, I think, for women in general, just being a business owner, entrepreneur as a female, no matter what industry you're in. But I certainly embrace those uncomfortable moments and let it fuel me to further establish that, yes, I have a right to be here. I have a voice. My voice should be heard. It is not, again, the end all be all opinion, but hey, it's a starting point to have more conversation. And that's where I try to meet everybody, and every, interaction I have is just, this is a starting point for more discussion.
I see so many parallels between what you're doing as an entrepreneur and being a woman in that space, and how you're kind of going in to break the stigma. I mean, just by existing, you're breaking the stigma. Just, I mean, who you are and what you bring to the table, and being in that space. It's so parallel to what you're doing for like cannabis and like the larger conversation as a tool and as something that should be legal and something that should be accessible. It's like, I don't know. I feel like you're doing the same thing for your product as you're kind of doing for yourself and other women that want to be in this space, or just like be taken
Thank you.
serious in general. And yeah, just the humility that you bring, and the real thought and value driven intentions that you have behind what you're doing is just so evident in everything that you talk about, and makes me so excited about. I mean, I'm excited that I'm in Austin and that this is something like really accessible, like the things that you bring to the table and Restart, which I want to hear a little bit more about. And maybe you can even say what people listening that maybe aren't in Austin, aren't in Texas, how they can kind of engage with you and what you create. So yeah, just anything about what you're doing, what Restart's doing, and how listeners can like stay involved with you and your products.
Yeah, thank you again for the opportunity to speak my truth. It's, what I hope for everybody is that they can do something in life that they feel really encouraged and passionate about. And if you would have told, high school me, who was very much getting high at the concerts in Austin, RIP, the original emos, RIP, the Parish, all those good OG venues of my time, I would have laughed. I would have been like, there's literally no way ever, let alone be like an entrepreneur with my own business, that I'd be working in cannabis. So to be here is just a testament of kind of failing forward. And I'm super blessed that I get to have a business with my two sisters. So we're a sister women owned cannabis brand headquartered right here in Austin, Texas. And kind of, how we started the conversation, understanding the differences between hemp and marijuana. Our business is hemp derived. So we are federally legal as well as state legal. So we do operate essentially like a dispensary model here in Austin. I have a brick and mortar. We are 6 years in business this August. So just shy of almost 6 years and some change coming up, but we're super grateful that we have this opportunity to be doing this business in our hometown, in our home state. I do e-commerce as well. And so we ship our products nationwide. So I think that is also part of why I'm so passionate about federal cannabis policy and advocacy, and trying to understand just where this is all going and what's the industry going to look like. And ultimately, truly, for I appreciate, what you're observing about me. At my heart, I'm a very selfish person, candidly. And so I do this all for me first and foremost, of just me as a consumer. What do I want to see? What are the products that I want to put in my body? And so I think there's a little bit of, assurance then for our customers of like, wow, like I'm not just putting products on the shelf because it's buzzy or trendy. It's like, what am I going to consume, and what do I want to look at, and what are like the ingredients and the sourcing and the integrity and the education. Like basically I made Restart because that's how I wanted to shop, like that's how my sisters and I look at the world and how we look at products. And
Yeah.
just saw an opportunity to make a clean, safe, welcoming, trustworthy space where consumers could ask these questions. They could wrestle through things. They could try different products. They could just learn and educate themselves. And that is so much of what we again seek as individuals, that we wanted to really make sure was resonating with Restart. But yeah, 6 years in business, and just launched next day delivery here in Austin. We also offer curbside pickup. We've got a lot of really fun community events that we're a part of, because part of our mission is to be in our community, be involved. So if you are local in Austin, I would just encourage you, if you are curious and you want to get connected to us, to some of the information we have, just to be a part of, some of the opportunities and events that we're a part of, I would say find us on social media at Restart CBD is the best place. And our website is just restartcbd.com. Yeah, Austin, Texas, baby. 2018, Austin, Texas. That's when we started, and happy to be here every day.
Love it. Yeah. So I'm going to have all of that linked below if anybody wants to follow along, find out more, go visit, Restart. If you're in Austin, I'm definitely going to be doing that. But I just appreciate getting to talk to you so much. I feel like this was so much good information. I've learned a ton, so I'm sure everybody listening has learned a ton. And I've just absolutely loved getting connected with you and hearing more about all your thoughts and what you're up to.
Thank you so much for the platform. Thanks for the time. And if anybody has any questions, I know that Hayden, like you mentioned, is going to link it in the show notes below. But truly, my door, both physically and the proverbial door of social media, LinkedIn, find me, connect, ask your questions, come to our dispensary. There's literally not a silly thing that you could ask us that we would shy away from answering. So if you feel compelled and called, we're happy to, chat back and help you understand things a little bit better. So thank you.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.
Bye, y'all.